cut you off.
Booker the drive, gets inside, leads in, back away and stolen by Holiday. Phoenix has to foul, and a pinnacle ball throws it down. And a foul. Working against Butler, got downhill, couldn't punch it. Bam says, get it out of here. Adebayo, sky high with the block and rejection. That's why he's NBA All-Defensive Team. Caldwell Pope inside, he's tied up by Green. Throws it back up top, James puts up the three. Oh, it's gone! LeBron James from downtown as the shot clock expires.
Gets it into Durant. Here is Durant moving on Tucker. He turns, he shoots.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Deep from Three, presented by the Athletes Hub. I'm Devin Withers. Alongside, like always, is Isaiah Hansen, Gary Sunnyberger. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Good stuff. Awesome. We got a lot of great topics to go through today. We've, gone through some regular season action now, so now we can start to formulate our opinions, whether our teams have caught up to the hype or whether they've let us down so far. So let's start off with a little buy or sell. Something we've been talking about, me specifically, was the Chicago Bulls are looking real nice out in the Eastern Conference. I know I mentioned that this was a team that I thought was going to, spend big in free agency, and I thought this was a team that was going to take a little bit of time to gel together, but it seems like they've gelled together a lot quicker than we thought. So are you buying or selling that the Chicago Bulls are now a legit team?
I'm buying, but depends what you mean by legit team. Okay, by legit team, if you mean playoffs, potentially even a higher seed, then yeah, I'll go ahead and buy that. But if we're talking about a serious championship contender team, I'm not going to give them that just yet. This team reminds me a lot, and maybe it's DeMar DeRozan, I don't know what it is, but it reminds me of the Raptors before Kawhi Leonard got there, when they were just fighting at the top of the standings every year, but weren't really competing for a championship just yet. I feel like that's where the Bulls are. They're actually in a similar place probably to my Knicks, so where they are. They're going to be fighting. I do see them maybe getting to a second or a third round, which I don't see my Knicks doing. But they're definitely a good team, but I'm not ready to buy it just yet. You do have DeMar DeRozan, who knows how to step up in big moments. And, of course, Lonzo Ball, he's still kind of finding his footing there, but even with the stats not showing up, he does affect them in a winning manner. Like, you see him moving around most of the time. And the Bulls, I mean, they've been fighting every game. They're a gritty team. Aside from the loss to the Knicks, they have done really well. And I do see them finishing at the top seed, which I did not see them doing early on. I saw them maybe going sixth, maybe fifth. But I could realistically see them, especially with the questions around the Nets and other top teams, I could see them finishing near the top three. So I buy them, but not quite championship ready yet.
All right, that's fair. Gary, let's turn it over to you. Do you think that the Bulls are going to be a hot team? Iz makes a lot of good points. Where do you sort of weigh in on all this?
I'm buying. I really am. I'm buying. I'm paying a lot of money for this Bulls team right now. They've looked really, really good. Earlier this year, I said they'd be a good team if they were a good defensive team. I know that they have a couple of 20-point-per-game scorers on offense. The defense is really what I was worried about for this team. If they didn't get that stops on the defensive end, they wouldn't be able to run in transition like I thought that they would be very, very good at. And they've kind of proved it. They're fifth in the league in defensive rating this year. They're 10th in offense. Basically, between their net and their net ratings, between their offensive defense, it leaves them with a 7.9 net rating, which is fourth in the league. And they addressed all of the offseason issues that they had from last season. Last year, they needed somebody to take care of a ball. They were one of the highest turnover rates in the league. They needed somebody to get to the line. They needed somebody to create for themselves, and they needed somebody that can score reliably. And they were lucky enough to get DeMar DeRozan to do literally all four of those things. He is bringing a lot of life to this team on the possessions where Zach LaVine can't just score every single time on the court. Lonzo Ball has done a great job distributing, playing good defense. Alex Caruso has made some impactful stuff off the bench. And I mean, this team, like Isaiah said, 4th seed, 3rd seed, I could see it, especially with how the East has turned out with the top seeds, like the Nets having some struggle. We'll get into the Heat later with where they rank with the Bulls. But this Bulls team looks really good. And I'm interested in how you feel, Devin, with your Lonzo take earlier this year. He hasn't had like a good stat sheet season, but the Bulls are winning. I know it doesn't really matter in terms of wins and losses. If you're getting the W's, who cares what the stat sheet says? But what do you think?
Yeah, this is interesting, right? Because this was before the season started. All we had to go off of was just what we saw in preseason and then also what we just saw on paper. I'm not just driving the bandwagon. I'm taking the bandwagon to the gas station. I'm fueling up the bandwagon, and we're going on a road trip because there's 2 things that are guaranteed to go to the moon in today's day and age, and it's cryptocurrency and it's the Chicago Bulls. And the Chicago Bulls are absolutely it's the depth. That's really what it is. Like, as a Lakers fan, I love what I see from Alex Caruso coming off the bench for him. And this is a team right now, Gary brought up a lot of good numbers. This isn't just a team that's really good offensively. They're actually even better defensively. They're 4th in the scoring defense, and that allows them to be 5th in scoring differential. And what I really liked, the number 1 move that I saw out of the Chicago Bulls was that they paid a good amount of money to bring in DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan, he's been with Toronto, he's been with San Antonio, and now he's over here with Chicago. Would you believe me if I said Zach LaVine was the guy I thought was the guy? But they have almost identical stats, Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. Both over 20 points per game, both over 5 rebounds per game, both over 4 assists per game. A 25-4 slash line right there from not 1 but 2 players. 1 player alone will be enough to win a handful of games, but having 2 of those guys and then also the additional depth on top of them, I think it's very, very overpowered right now. I'm really impressed by what I see from the Bulls. I'm not putting an asterisk on it like my guy is over there is. I am 100%. I've been bought in. I can't be any more in than I am right now. Am I saying that they're going to go to the NBA championship? No, I'm not going to say that they're going to the finals. Am I saying that they're going to win a title this year? It's too early to tell. But they have the making of being one of the top 3 or 4 seeds and making some noise. It wouldn't surprise me if this was a team that people started to talk about when it came down to possibly the Eastern Conference semifinals as like their height right now. And you never know what can happen in the postseason, right? I mean, there's been teams, nobody thought the Phoenix Suns were going to be a team that was going to represent out West. Everybody thought that the Los Angeles Lakers were going to wipe the floor with them, but that's not what happened. So I'm definitely interested in seeing what the Chicago Bulls have. But yeah, are there any concluding thoughts on my little monologue right there?
I love how in you're in on them. I know that's a confusing sentence.
I'm not even a Bulls fan. That's the crazy thing.
You're not a Bulls fan. If anything, I would understand you not liking the Bulls, being a Lakers fan and watching them dominate for a while and kind of being jealous. But I will say the idea behind the Bulls being as good as they are because of their depth is so important, because we never even mentioned Nikola Vucevic's name anywhere in the last 8 minutes. And he's a guy who, if given the right teammates around him, as he has now, he is the perfect big man for an offense with guys who can kind of create, but also with guys who can share the ball as well as Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, and Lonzo Ball and Caruso can. And, I mean, a little bit of shout out to Javonte Green. I know his numbers don't jump right off the page, but he's starting for this team. And, I mean, you can't argue with the results. The guy knows what he's doing on the court. He knows where to stand. And I'm excited to watch the team for the rest of the year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, one thing I like about this Bulls team, which, again, I'm not giving them championship status, but I like that nobody's doing anything that's, like, extraordinary. Everybody's just kind of playing their game, and they're winning games. Like Nikola Vucevic, I was wondering how he would be able to do, because he's been on the Magic for so long, and, he never really had a real team to fit into. So I was curious to see how he would adjust. Would he be a diminished version of himself? But he's done just as good as he's always done. So I don't feel like there's much – it's not like, DeRozan's coming out scoring 40 points a game, and that's how they're winning. Everybody's playing their game, and Lonzo Ball hasn't even really found himself yet. So that's why I definitely do see them getting to a top seed. I do wonder how this team would deal with adversity, though. Like, say, God forbid, DeMar DeRozan goes down or somebody like that. Are they able to, take that kind of loss and still be dominant? But other than that, very impressive so far. Still, there is an asterisk there. So
I think Patrick Williams not being in there might hurt a little bit. He's been ruled out for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he's a good player, but unless DeMar DeRozan, Levine, or Caruso go down, I can't believe I put Caruso in there. I meant to say Lonzo, but think about how much that's coming in my head now.
Caruso.
He's just that good. He's good. His numbers don't show on the stat sheet, but, I mean, the dude knows how to play basketball. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And from going from one side to the other, the teams that are riding high to a team that I'm a little disappointed in. I don't know about you guys, but as a Lakers fan, it's hurt to watch this team struggle early on. They did come away with a win over the Houston Rockets, but I want to gather your guys' thoughts. Buy or sell that the Lakers aren't as good as we thought that they were. Gary, what do you think?
I'm selling. I'm not ready to say that the Lakers are bad. I will point out they have played how many games? 7. They're 4-3, right? Correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, that's not. I'm not ready to put 7 games in and completely call the Lakers bad. I know that this is the deep takes from 3, but my deep take is that let's wait for LeBron James to settle into the team that he has before we decide to throw him overboard. They suffered from the curse of the Lakers, which is the peak expectations in their preseason. You see a team with Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and you put them in the city of LA, and that team is supposed to be the greatest team ever assembled, according to some delusional Lakers fans. That being said, I thought they were going to be the number 1 seed in the West. I'm not saying that they're not good, but let's stop this like they're terrible throw team ready for it yet. They're first in the league in pace. They've won 3 of their last 4. And last night, or the night before that, Russ was plus 25 and went 2 for 4 on threes. Will that keep up? I'm not sure, but this Lakers team isn't as bad as people are throwing them out to be. They're not even playing what I would say is probably their best defensive center in Dwight Howard. They're not even playing him. He's getting DNPs. I'm not sure if there's an injury there. I haven't really quite looked into that, but when they get these guys offense to start playing to their expectations that they have for them, when Anthony Davis starts picking it up a little bit more and LeBron starts picking it up, I know he's had a little bit of a slow start with a couple of injuries. I'm not ready to count the Lakers dumpster fire out yet because they're the Los Angeles Lakers. Ever since I started watching the NBA, LeBron James has been, if not one of the best players in the league. I'm not going to say they're bad just yet.
Okay. All right. I can respect that. And we were talking a little bit about this before we even started recording, where the last show we were talking about the Lakers, apparently, according to one headline, could have been the 9th seed. And right now, with, like Gary said, it's a very small sample size, 4-3, but they're not playing like a top seed right now. But what's your take on the Lakers, buying or selling?
I am selling that they're not as good as we thought they were, because I kind of said it from the beginning that I didn't see them finishing as a top seed. Like when I say top seed, I mean like top 3 or so. I feel like this team just simply is not a regular season team. I almost look at these games as like their extended preseason. They're still trying to figure out how to work together and how to get the best out of Westbrook while not taking away from the other guys. Yet they're still winning. Like you said, they're 4-3. So they're good enough to get you to the playoffs. The 9th seed drama, that's just a little bit too far for me. I wouldn't go that route. I do see them at least finishing at the 5 seed. Like that's the highest I would give them. I will say that. But regardless, when it comes to them in the playoffs, you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, just like they had a couple years back. And we saw what they were able to do when they were playing together and healthy. So anything extra that Westbrook could give you is a plus. And if Westbrook can correlate the numbers that he's always able to put up, or maybe slightly lesser, and like I said, have it equal to winning games, and they're a serious threat. Now, I didn't predict them to come out of the West because I'm not sure if they have enough, if it's going to happen in the playoffs where you can get Westbrook to where he is. But it's not because of the Lakers not being good. It's simply the other teams in the West that I feel like could knock off the Lakers at some point. But so yeah, don't panic. They're not going to be a 9th seed. I definitely don't see that. I'll be shocked. I'd probably put a good bet on that right now that they'll finish at least higher than that. But yeah, I don't see them as a regular season team. This is a extended preseason for them. They're just preparing for their actual season, which is the playoffs.
I'll say this because it's my opinion, but I almost think it's factual right now. Who do you guys, and this isn't like a trick question, but who do you guys think the best player on the Lakers has been so far this season through the first 7 games?
Oh my gosh, I need to look at some numbers before I come up with an answer. But
So
like
while you
off
guys
the
are
top of my head, I want to say Westbrook.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that's crazy, but like it's kind of because of how much he's used, right?
Yeah.
Like he has the ball the whole time.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So like, especially with LeBron being out, he's the blame for them losing, but he's also the blame for them winning. So it's like you got to give it to Westbrook. Yeah.
Okay, and this sets up perfectly right here what I'm about to say. The best player on the Lakers, undoubtedly the last 2 games, but possibly all this season, has been none other than one of Iz's favorite players. It's been Carmelo Anthony, for goodness sakes. Carmelo Anthony has been one of the best players on the Lakers. I'm just looking at the game log right now. In the win over the Houston Rockets last night, 23 points on 8 of 14 from the field, 5 of 8 from deep. And then he also put in 4 blocks and 3 rebounds and 2 steals. The game before that, in which they beat the Cleveland Cavaliers, once again, the Cavs and the Houston Rockets, not at the top. They're not the cream of the crop. He put up 24 points, 9 of 12 from the field, 6 of 8 from deep to go with 5 blocks and an assist. And like, this is absurd. Like, Carmelo Anthony is our most efficient 3-point shooter. Like, I feel like I've gone back in time to middle school. I'm not sure what's happening, but it's interesting because where Carmelo Anthony, the reason the Lakers have won these last 2 games is in spite of LeBron James. LeBron James over the last 2 games, 1 of 16 from beyond the 3-point range. 1 of 16, including, I believe it was 0 for 6 last night, and then the game before that against the Cavs, he was 1 for 10 from deep. So LeBron James, I don't know what's going on, but here's sort of my theory is, and we talked about this before the season even started, we were talking about usage rate, right? I said Russell Westbrook and LeBron James, their winning formula comes from them having the ball in their hands. They don't share the ball. They drive to the basket. They get to the line. They score. That's what they do. That's how they win the games. They don't step back and shoot. I've seen it dozens of times where Russell Westbrook, I'm almost positive me and Russell Westbrook could probably go head-to-head in a 3-point competition, and I feel okay about my chances. You know what I mean? This guy is absolutely insanity. It's insanity. But I will say Russell Westbrook, he was the leader in turnovers last season. Guess what? This season, Russell Westbrook leading the league in turnovers with 36 across 7 games. So, and I'm sitting here and we talked a little bit about Anthony Davis in the previous show that we did. I said everybody was telling Anthony Davis, the ball is going in your hands. The ball is going in your hands. This is your team. Anthony Davis is 12th in the league in scoring, but this is supposed to be one of the best teams, right? Russell Westbrook and LeBron James are 2 of the most efficient passers that we've seen in the history of the league. Like, there's not a huge separation between – everyone says the comparison is, oh, LeBron James is more of a Magic Johnson type than he is a Michael Jordan type, right? Because of their ability to pass and their IQ. Russell Westbrook the same way. He can dominate a box score unlike anybody else we've seen in the history of the NBA. But the problem is you have 2 of the smartest players in NBA history passing the ball to Anthony Davis, but Anthony Davis is somehow 12th in scoring. This isn't a team, if they play with this current formula, I don't think that they're going to go as far as we think they are. I think is probably a little bit more on track where we say they're definitely not going to be a top 3 seed, I don't think, this year. They'll be somewhere in the middle of the pack, but we were talking about before the show is all you need to do is get into the playoffs, and then all of a sudden we call it like you activate LeBron Jones, like playoff LeBron. That's all you need, right? Yeah. Like he's wearing number 6. He'll put on the headband. Russell Westbrook's going to show up in his, crazy costumes or outfits, pregame, and everybody's going to have the hype right back around him. But I don't know. Like I've been on this, this theory that the Lakers seem more like the Lakers of last year than they did of 2 years ago. Like they brought back, names that they had during their championship run, but the pieces just aren't coming together. Like, I'm not impressed with DeAndre Jordan. I'd rather have Dwight Howard in my starting lineup. I'm not really sure why Carmelo Anthony is like the reason we're winning basketball games. Like, that should never be the case in this day and age. But yeah, I don't know what it is. But Gary, what do you sort of think, like, as concluding thoughts for the Lakers?
I think you bring up a great point with LeBron in his 3-point just attempts in general. His career high before this season was 6.3 per game, which was just the last 2 seasons. He's never shot more than the last 2 years from deep. This year, he's shooting 9 a game, which I don't think is sustainable for the Lakers offense, but also for LeBron, you have to think about it in the terms of, is he actually finally slowing down? And I choke myself when I say that, because I said that 3 years ago and then he proved me wrong. So I'm not going to say it again, definitively, but yeah, I think you make a great point with this Lakers team, and there's lineup issues with how they're starting players. I did read here that Dwight Howard is game to game with a neck injury, so I'm not quite sure if that's a coaching decision. But as much as it is just, I think you're right on the head. This team looks a lot more like last year's Lakers and not the championship Lakers from 2 years ago.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about your concluding thoughts about the Lakers before we move on. Is this a team that's eventually going to even out?
Yeah, I definitely see them evening out. Like I said, they're definitely going to get to the playoffs. But, something about the fitting, you talk about LeBron, chucking up those threes, 9 attempts a game. If you watch, I haven't watched every game of the Lakers, but I watched a few this season. And when you see, it's like LeBron's almost trying to force it, maybe to make up for the mishaps of Westbrook along the way. And it's I got to chuck up these threes. And if you look at it, sometimes you see Westbrook kind of standing around waiting for the ball, and then he goes full forward. But other than that, you don't really see him moving around with the ball. I don't know if I'm the only one that noticed that. I mean, without the ball, I'm sorry. So it's almost like they're still forcing it. It's an identity issue. That's something I mentioned at the beginning too. They don't really know who is the team, and I do apologize to Carmelo Anthony, but they will even out. Carmelo, you're right. He is the best player in the Lakers, and I should have said that. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'll be a clip.
As we near the halfway point of this podcast or this episode, we do want to talk about some, teams that have had hot starts. We talked a little bit about the Bulls, and we've also talked about teams with not so hot starts like the Lakers, right? But I want to give you guys each the opportunity to talk about a team that you do think had a hot start, a hotter start that we may have anticipated. How about you start us off? What's a team that we had a hot start with?
There's no other team that I could start with other than my New York Knicks. Okay, look, I knew the Knicks were going to be good again, but there was a little bit of a worry, after Julius Randle basically got exposed in the playoffs, how he was going to come back. Was there going to be a little bit of a confidence issue where he had to build himself back up? And at times we do see glimpses of that Julius Randle that got shut down. But one thing he's able to do, and maybe now he's just more confident with it, when he's getting double teamed, you just see him passing out to the right guys every time. He's getting so good with his decision making. Evan Fournier has slipped right in. It's just been clutch. Anytime I see him with the ball, there's a little bit of a smile. I'm like, okay, here we go, 3 points. He just come through when needed. Kemba Walker, he hasn't quite found his footing yet, almost like Lonzo Ball. But when he's on the court, they just seem to do well. He's a good leader. He seems to be happy to be there. His interviews are always filled with smiles. And it's just a kind of, I think he just affects the winning culture a bit for them. And every game is a battle, okay? You can make an argument every game they could have potentially lost or won at this point, but they've been able to pull it out late in games. Tom Thibodeau is I've never had so much fun watching a coach. You see him out on the edge screaming at them. You can see him getting on Julius Randle's chops, Julius, what the hell was that?
He goes, ice, 30 times during the game. You can hear him over the speakers.
Yes, you can. So he cares so much, and I do worry long term how they're going to be able to do when it comes to durability issues, because they're really out there fighting 12-round boxing matches every single game. Even in the preseason, they were coming out there playing a lot of minutes, but I do have to highlight them. They're 5-1. I figured they would be good, but I definitely didn't see them being this good, especially coming out with the win against the Bulls the other day. I was definitely a little bit worried. But when it got late, they found a way. Even though it's weird because they don't seem to be that good with being ahead. But they love just being in a battle, and they love just winning last minute. So I got to highlight that.
Yeah, and the part that I like the most, I think the part that I like the most about the Knicks, and the Knicks are a team that I've been paying attention to watching during the regular season, and you talked a little bit about Kemba Walker and how he hasn't come into full form yet, but the part that I like about the Knicks is their depth that they have, because even when Kemba Walker isn't at 100 on a given night, all you really need is Kemba Walker at a pretty good night, because then all of a sudden you got your guy Derrick Rose coming off the bench who can just do the rest of the job for you. So you don't need prime Kemba Walker or prime Derrick Rose to find success at the point guard position. But the Knicks are, I'll give it to you. You found your way to slip in the Knicks. So I can give you credit for it. But Gary, talk to us a little bit about your team with the hot start.
Okay, I would like to admit, first of all, I am a hypocrite. Giant hypocrite, massive hypocrite. I've got a Dolphin shirt on. I've got a South Florida Flanagan's Cup here. Everyone who's been there knows. I'm going to talk about the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat, I almost said weird. I'm such a bad fan. The Miami Heat are first in defense in the league. They're fourth in offense, and I'm going to say it right now before anybody else does, and I'm not going to reference any tweets that we just might have seen. Jim VP. I'm ready for Jimmy Butler to be in the MVP discussions and for Bam Adebayo to be in Defensive Player of the Year discussions. Bam is holding opponents to the lowest field goal percentage in the league at the rim. Jimmy Butler is scoring like crazy. He's getting his teammates involved. We've got Kyle Lowry playing perfectly into the role, and while the stats may not show it, that guy is orchestrating that offense and creating that engine that last year the team didn't have. They looked dead. They looked stagnant. They could defend, but they couldn't get up and down the court at a rate that they needed to. And Kyle Lowry is pushing that tempo. He's pushing the pace. You've got guys like PJ Tucker slotting in, shooting corner threes, guarding the best guy on the court so that Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry and Bam Adebayo can play like free safeties. It's crazy. It looks like the 90s Cowboys out there. The Tyler Hero scoring like crazy. He's not a bubble fraud anymore, and he still might look 18 and he still might look the same age, but he's playing like an NBA veteran. He's finding the roll man on cuts. He's picking his spots to shoot and score. He's leading the bench mob in points. They're first in rebounding, this entire team. And I will say Tyler is a lot better of a rebounder for a guard than I would have anticipated. And yeah, the team is looking freaking incredible. And that's even without Duncan Robinson or Kyle Lowry shooting particularly well. I got a tweet earlier that Jimmy Butler was named Player of the Week, obviously super deserved. And yeah, I'm just super excited for what this team has. They're tough. They're strong. They aren't even shooting the ball that well, and they don't even have Victor Oladipo back yet. Mm-hmm. So for me, at least as a fan of the team, it's been a joy to watch, but I'd say more as a person who likes basketball in general, watching the Miami Heat really does feel like that, not 90s era of basketball, but that like toughness where we're not really worried about maybe clotheslining the guy on the other side of the court if he gets too close to the rim.
Yeah, I think you said it best. We were talking about it beforehand, and I was mentioning, hey, your Heat look pretty good, and you said it best. Like, you guys have an MVP candidate in Butler, like very early premature standings.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm not going to get too crazy and say that he's like going to win it in April, but I'm also not going to say that I wouldn't be surprised if you see him at least top 5 at the end of the year if the Heat finish with a good enough ranking.
And that could be the case with Butler in the MVP conversation, Bam in the defensive player of the year category, and you could get Tyler Hero in the 6th man of the year category. Like, there's a bunch of things to like about the Heat. I wish I could be like you guys and talk about my favorite team, the Lakers, is a hot team, but unfortunately that's not the case, as we just heard.
They're 3-1 in the last 4. I'm not ready to put them off. I know you like. I'm gonna keep bringing that up, but they're not bad.
They beat dog water teams. They beat the Houston Rockets and the Cleveland Cavaliers for 2 of those games. I have to see them beat somebody that has give me something, you know what I mean? But a team that I will run with, and a team that's giving me more than enough reason to get excited about, and it's not the Chicago Bulls, but it is a team out in the Eastern Conference. I'm actually a big fan of what the Charlotte Hornets have done to start this season. It was a team where I was like, okay, we saw them in the play-in tournament last year. They got absolutely annihilated after beating out the Indiana Pacers. But I was like, well, is LaMelo Ball like really the guy? And it hasn't been LaMelo Ball as the guy. It's actually been none other than a breakout candidate for this year in Miles Bridges, who is averaging 24.6 points per game and 7.7 rebounds. This is a guy that came out of nowhere. Nobody expected, even Charlotte fans will tell you, nobody expected Miles Bridges to be the breakout candidate. Everyone was expecting, either Mason Plumlee to bring in more rebounds. It could have been LaMelo with more assists. It could have been a whole bunch of things up and down the list, but I really like what I've seen from Miles Bridges. He is absolutely taking over for this team when it comes to scoring priority. And this is a team that's starting right now 5-2 within their first 7 games. And the teams that they're beating, unlike my Lakers, aren't really scrubs. Like, they've beat Portland, who's actually a pretty good team. I love what they have on their roster. This is a team that constantly makes the playoffs in the West. They beat the Brooklyn Nets. That alone tells you on paper, hey, like, you're good enough to compete with the top dogs in the Eastern Conference. And they also beat the Pacers in their first rematch since coming back from that play-in tournament. So I really like what the Charlotte Hornets have done. It's going to be interesting to see where they actually pan out, whether they eventually level out. I think they'll sink back down to about like the 5 or the 6 spot is probably their like comfort zone right now. But I think they avoid the play-in tournament. I think they actually end up securing one of those top 8 seeds. And it's going to be interesting seeing what they can do in the playoffs, because last year they looked really, really good against the Pacers, but then they did not look good whatsoever for the rest of that duration for whatever reason. Clearly outmatched all the way through in the playoffs last year. But yeah, I definitely want to flip the script with you guys. I want to talk about a team that now has they had high expectations coming into it. They're off to a little bit of a slower start than we expected. This time we'll start with Gary.
I have got, for this particular thing, I've got the Suns. And I mean that with love. They've been bad. I mean this with love. They've been bad. This Suns team has struggled a lot this season. I'm not quite sure if it has to do with the new foul rule. I know that Chris Paul was a guy who was routinely put in those conversations of guys who kind of exploit the refs a little bit. I'm not ready to say that that's the entire reason that him and Devin Booker haven't had a good season this year, but they're bottom 3rd in the league in offense and defense, and they have not shot well from 3 at all. They're 37th in 3-point percentage and last in 3-pointers made. They're only making 9 a game, which is like in this era, like historically bad. They had a decent win against the Cavs earlier this week, but with this Ayton situation, with CP3 not being able to score as easily, with all the 3-point issues, I have some questions about this Suns team. I know Monty Williams won. He was in the running for coach. Did he win Coach of the Year last year? Or was it Tom Thibodeau that actually got the award? Whichever one, he was right up there at the end of the year with him in that award race. I don't see it for this team this year. I'm not quite sure why we were super high on them in the first place. Yes, they made the NBA Finals last year, but looking back at their roster, I don't know. I'm not quite sure why they decided to sign the guys they signed and not sign Ayton. I said last week or the last 2 weeks ago that I didn't really think the Ayton signing was too big of a deal, but now with some time into it, it seems to be affecting his play style. It seems to be affecting how he's looking at the game. He wants to get paid, and him sacrificing as much on defense as he did last year might not quite relate to the payday he's looking for. So if he's trying to shoot a little bit more and kind of taking the flow out of that Suns offense, it really leaves some offense and defense to be desired. And if he's not bought in and CP3 isn't going well, and basically your 3 best players with Devin Booker being added there aren't playing up to snuff, you're not going to be that great. And I really hope that they turn this around, just because it was fun watching a team like the Suns last year, who were kind of unexpected, rising up through the ranks, beating some Western Conference team, getting to the finals. And although they lost, it was a really cool story. Everyone was on the side of Chris Paul, wanting him to get his first ring. And although it didn't happen, it was a feel-good story. And it's sad to see the Suns kind of regress like this. I'm not ready to throw them off just now, but it's a team to look into when we're talking at the end of the year about people that we might have overhyped a little bit after a good season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the last season, the Suns were one of the least talked about teams, and they ended up making that, huge run all the way to the NBA Finals. And now this season, everybody's talking about them. and they just haven't lived up. I mean, that's a really great example of a team that we thought was going to have a hot start, and we thought they were going to be at the top of the Western Conference to start the year, and that just hasn't been the case. But yeah, it is. Who's your team that you thought was going to have a better start, but just hasn't lived up to it yet?
So maybe I'm not sure if I thought they would have a better start, but I do think a team that needs to be highlighted is the Clippers right now. Starting off, I believe they just won one. They only won one game so far, one that came against the Blazers, and everybody else other than Paul George, and even Paul George at times, has been silent. You had players last year that contributed. As of right now, the only players averaging double digits for them so far, you got Eric Bledsoe, Reggie Jackson, and Luke Kennard, but they're all also averaging under 40% from the field. So you've been seeing them, kind of struggle to find their footing, especially without Kawhi. I think they're having an identity crisis of their own now. They're like, okay, we know Paul George is the guy, but Reggie Jackson's like, so what do I do with my hands? So he's still trying to figure his way around. But I just want to highlight so far their schedule. So far, the only game they have won was one of the two that they played against the Blazers so far. And the Blazers are going to be a tough out every time you face them with Damian Lillard there. And then they also lost to the Grizzlies, which they're a tough team to be reckoned with, especially with John Morant. They kind of understand their team. And then, of course, you got the Warriors, which they have looked really good, and they're almost scary, especially when Klay Thompson comes back. How much are they going to really rise after his return? And then they had a unexcusable loss against the Cavaliers. They lost 92-79. Paul George only showed up with 12 points that game. So that's not something they could keep doing. And that's the thing with Paul George. He almost reminds me of the current Cowboys, like you mentioned earlier. Accident waiting to happen. You just know something. He's going to implode at some point. You just don't know when. But so he can't do what he's been doing. Paul George, that is. He does have to kind of dig into that kind of the Pacers vibes, and maybe like the year when he was with the Thunder, he kind of took control with Westbrook behind him. I'm not saying they're going to be in the top seed or anything like that, but I do think they're going to, as the schedule goes along, as they get to play with each other a little more, and as they have a little bit of an easier schedule, they're also going to be in the playoffs, probably as a lower seed. They're probably a first-round exit, but I don't think they're going to be as bad as people see them. I've seen a lot of people try to put them at the bottom of the conference at the end of the year without Kawhi. I definitely don't see that happening.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because Paul George is first of all, I'm going to ignore the comments about the Dallas Cowboys because this is not an NFL podcast. But I will gladly, when we do start up our NFL podcast, I'll gladly invite you on for a spot and tell you a new one right there. But yeah, it's interesting, right? Because they call him Playoff P, but the problem is you can't be Playoff P if you're not getting to the playoffs, right? And Paul George, he's definitely one of the best two-way players, I think, over the last couple of years, and I think we can both agree on that. I mean, he was a superstar with the Indiana Pacers, and this was really his year to show up. I mean, I was talking about the Clippers as a team that might surprise us. We talked about this in our first show, I believe. I said, hey, listen, Kawhi's out. I think Reggie Jackson's going to be the guy to show up. I think Paul George is going to handle that role really well like he has with Indiana so many times before. And they surprised us. They just haven't surprised us in a great way so far. But, yeah, I agree. Both of those are great examples. And as much as I want to talk about my Lakers as a team, I felt like I touched up on them already. So I'm taking it across the way to their rivals over in Boston, Massachusetts. I don't think that the Celtics, who everybody is just waiting to break out, right? Everybody's like the Celtics are one piece away, or they're this close to getting to the NBA Finals. They're right up there with everybody else. They've competed very well against a lot of teams in the playoffs over the last couple of years, but, Brad Stevens and the rest of the squad just haven't been able to do it. And here's sort of where my problem is, right? Because they're 2-4 right now, which isn't terrible. I mean, they're a 2-game difference from just being 4-2. Two of their losses have been back-to-back losses over the last few days, I think dating back to October 27th against the Washington Wizards. They've had very, very good battles with the Washington Wizards. I know Iz said, he predicted this a while ago. And I mean, Bradley Beal said it best. He was like, you guys better be careful because when things start coming together, like that's going to be a dangerous team. And I was not expecting for it to come together so quickly, despite Kyle Kuzma is even showing up apparently. And I'm not ready to apologize to him yet. We're still working on our relationship right now. But here's sort of where my problem is with the Boston Celtics, right? Because Jason Tatum is undeniably a superstar. And when I was creating my notes, I said to myself, is Jason Tatum the guy that can win you a championship? Can he be the one to lead a team there? I think the answer to that is yes, but the problem is who's your number two? Because most cases would tell you that Jalen Brown is going to be your number two, right? And Jalen Brown, I mean, knows it best. When they played that, double overtime game against the Boston Celtics, that was a game that definitely felt like NBA playoff material. Game 7 on the line. He put up 46 points, 16 of 30 from the field. I mean, the team was on Jalen Brown's back. It wasn't on Tatum. And so you're saying, wow, Jalen Brown's due for a breakout year. What does he do in the very next game in a 115-83 loss to the Toronto Raptors? This man cost me money because I bet on him to hit the over on his point total, which was a measly 23 points. And he puts up 9, can't even put up double digits. What is wrong with you? 3 of 13 from the field, 0 of 7 from deep, had 5 turnovers along with 2 personal fouls. And then he bounces right back the next game against Charlotte in another overtime win, 30 points. Okay, now he's back on track. Now we're good. 116-107 loss to the Washington Wizards, where you put up 13 points. You cannot do that. It cannot be, I'm going to play hard and I'm going to play well every other day. If that's a team that wants to make it to the NBA Finals, you better get your act together, because right now, this early season, whatever it is, 2-4 across 6 games, I'm just not having it with Jalen Brown right now, and I don't think that there's another clear-cut number 2. Don't give me that malarkey with Marcus Smart as the number 2. Don't give me that malarkey with Robert Williams as the number 2. It's Jalen Brown and only Jalen Brown as the number 2, but the team does not go to the NBA Finals unless Jalen Brown can step up.
100%. Jalen Brown is the key to the Boston Celtics' success. He is, if not the Russell Westbrook to Kevin Durant, if we're talking about the OKC Thunder from a couple of years ago. He is the guy who unlocks the pure scorer in Tatum. If he isn't showing up for games, what are you doing as an organization with your second star? You want to put a guy next to Jason Tatum who's going to bring out the best of his game while also filling in for those little gaps. Jalen Brown plays defense. Jalen Brown can score, but is Jalen Brown consistent? And that's what Devin has pointed out. He's not. And so if you're going to have a superstar player who you're going to pay like a superstar, who's going to make all-star teams like a superstar, but when you ask him in a do-or-die game, or if you ask him in a game that, doesn't really mean all too much, but in the grand scheme of things, the more losses you pile up over the end of the year, the more your playoff chances dwindle. So if Jalen Brown is going to be a guy that the Celtics keep on long-term next to Jason Tatum, it's going to have to happen soon.
Absolutely. And so as we start to wrap up the show, one of the hottest topics over the last few weeks has been this NBA anniversary, the 75th year, where the NBA is now ranking their top 70 players of all time. It's got a lot of people heated, and it's caused a lot of conversation. So I'm interested in hearing from you guys on one player that you think was snubbed from this list. And I was surprised. I'm not surprised, because a lot of the players that we talked about beforehand were definitely snubs. But I'm interested in hearing who you guys came down with for the one player that you believed was the most snub. We're going to start with you.
It's one that really shocked me, especially when you consider that you had Dennis Rodman and Scottie Pippen on there. And I'm not saying they don't deserve to be there, but if you're going to include those guys, how do you leave out Klay Thompson? Klay Thompson is one of the top 5 3-point shooters of all time. Am I wrong for saying that?
No. Even you could go crazier. He say he's top 3, and I wouldn't crucify you. No.
We're talking about a 3-time NBA champion, and I'm not saying he was the focal point, but he was a focal point. I definitely don't see the Warriors winning the first ring that they caught in that whole dynasty without Klay Thompson. And he's definitely just as important to those rings as Steph Curry was, with the second and third ring that they had. We're talking about a 5-time All-Star, and we're not talking about him playing in the East the past couple of years. He's been playing in a really tough West. There's been a lot of talent out there, Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant for a long time. If you want to put him in that forward position, I know a lot of people want to throw him in the guard position. Then you had Westbrook putting up astronomical numbers, Damian Lillard, Chris Paul. So 5-time All-Stars sharing the court with those players. We got 2-time all-third NBA teams, and you could argue that he should have had more along the way. He's also had an all-defensive second team one time in his career, and that's one thing he doesn't get enough credit for. As much as he affects the team offensively. He's the guy that's taking on the tough defensive assignment. So he's been so important to the Warriors' success over the past couple of years. And there's definitely some players on there that I've saw their stats, some OGs. I can't really, pass judgment. I didn't see them play. But when you compare their resumes to Klay Thompson, and considering what Klay Thompson has done, and I'm not mentioning those big moments that he had, those quarters where he scored 1,000 points in a single, standing. Klay Thompson deserves to be on there somehow. If you're going to include Anthony Davis on there, if you're going to include Rodman and Pippen, and I'm not saying they don't deserve to be on there, you got to find a way to get Klay Thompson on there. He is part of one of the top dynasties of all time, and he was a very big piece of that. He was part of the 73-9 NBA team, and he was just as important to that, and they would not be 73-9 without Klay Thompson. So you cannot tell the NBA story, especially the last decade, without mentioning his name. He gets on there, and it's not even a question to me.
Yeah, I
100% agree. I know. I can deal with it all, and I will say I do want to point out I'm not ready to say that. I'm not ready to put any slander on Scottie Pippen's name. I would put Dennis Rodman in that conversation for sure. I do think Klay is probably better than him, but it's strange. Why is Klay not on there? And I really do think it might have to do with just we haven't seen him play recently. It might be just as simple as that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I don't know if Klay Thompson would have been number one on my list. I know we were talking about a different guy. I want to hear who Gary talks about first before I mention my guy, or because I don't know if he's going to cover the same guy that I was thinking about. But Gary, who do you have as the number one snub of your NBA top 75 list?
So I would like to explain with a little bit of a story first. When I was growing up, I was a Heat fan, of course. I loved watching the Heat. I became a huge fan around the 2007-2008 season for some reason. I don't know. Maybe Michael Beasley was intriguing, but I remember a specific player that was always kicking our ass every single game, and he went on to destroy us in the finals 2 years in a row and actually wind up beating the Miami Heat in the 2014 finals, and that is Manu Ginobili, who is super underappreciated in NBA history, and it mainly just has to do with the fact that he was the perfect player that was willing to sacrifice for team success. His counting stats don't really show up as someone that you would think is a top 75 player of all time, but I will say this, he never played other than one season more than 30 minutes a game. He is, if not the most impactful player in international basketball over the last 15 years in terms of Olympic success. He is probably the greatest sixth man to ever play in the NBA, and crafty, creative, brought more respect to left-handed players, brought that old man game even as a young guy while he was, Greg Popovich had to rein him in a couple of times, throwing crazy passes, doing behind the back stuff, but Manu Ginobili deserves the respect. He's 4 titles. He's made 2 All-Star teams, and those All-Star teams are, like Isaiah was saying earlier, while people in his conference were playing who were fantastic. So you have to give him a little bit more credit. He brought the Euro step into the NBA. He played for 16 seasons. And really, I like the story of the underdog, 57th pick in the second round out of Argentina. I'm all about it. I loved Manu Ginobili, watching him play, and although it was a little bit of a, struggle seeing him beat my Heat, I really kind of respected the guy for it. He did everything the right way. He did what he could for his team to win, and he did. And there's no doubting that Manu Ginobili was probably the second best player on all of those Spurs runs that they had. Tony Parker some years, but Manu Ginobili, you go look at the box scores, you ask a couple of fans who watched the games, Manu was the guy who they were going to late in the game to initiate the offense.
Yeah, Manu is definitely up there for me. So there's 2 players that I'm sort of thinking of, and one of them is that I think they're both for sure. First of all, I have to say, whoever created this, or whoever's responsible for this travesty that put Damian Lillard on the NBA top 5 or top 75 all-time list, and then also put Anthony Davis, like is mentioned, also on the same exact list, and they should both be replaced by these two names, and I wasn't even planning on doing the second name, but now I feel like I have to. The name that I wasn't going to mention at first, what about one of the best big men of all time? One of a top 10 big man of all time. It just seems like we're missing a center. It seems like we're missing a superhero. It seems like we're
say his name.
Superman. It seems like we're missing Dwight Howard. Come on, man. This guy has an NBA title. He's a 5-time All-NBA first-team selection. He is an 8-time All-Star. He is a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. He is a 4-time All-Defensive first-team selection. He ranks 11th in rebounds, 13th in blocks, 59th in scoring of all time. This was a guy when he was on the Orlando Magic during that early 2000s. Man, this was a guy that nobody could stop, and he's been relevant all the way throughout his career. Yeah, he's had some dips and dives. The Houston Rockets didn't work out. When he first joined the Los Angeles Lakers, it did not work out because the Lakers management was in complete shambles, thinking that surrounding an old Kobe Bryant with an even older Steve Nash, along with a washed up at the time Dwight Howard, was a good idea. When it just wasn't going to come together, they tried repainting this big three that just didn't work out. It was closer to what the Brooklyn Nets had at the time with Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett than it actually was to like the Miami Heat big three that we've come to love it or hate. But yeah, Dwight Howard, absolutely one of the best big men. We've seen such a second wind to his career since coming back to the Lakers, won that championship where he actually played a really vital role. I'll tell you guys right now. So this is an important stat to remember. Over 13,000 rebounds and over 2,000 blocks in his career. The only other players in NBA history to do that: Tim Duncan, Kevin Durant, Shaq, Hakeem, Robert Parrish, and Kareem. That is an elite group, all guys that were on that top 75 list, and somehow we're leaving out Dwight Howard. I'm not saying that he belongs up there with Shaq or that he belongs in the top 25. I'm not saying he belongs in the top 50, but give my guy somewhere in the 60s. This is a guy, he was one of the best big men that we've seen. He was so dominant in his prime. He was winning slam dunk. Like, dude, this guy was amazing. He was just built completely different. But I want to say, and this is where it bothers me, right? Because Anthony Davis, how dare you have the audacity to walk into this top 75 list? Because you're not even – there's a different Lakers big man, and I'm not talking about Dwight Howard this time, but there's a different Lakers big man that I think deserved to be on this list instead of Anthony Davis. His name is Pau Gasol. Pau Gasol deserves to be on this list, and let me tell you why. This is a man with 2 titles, and he has 4 All-NBA selections as well as 6 All-Star appearances. He has a better resume than Anthony Davis does. He has a better resume than Damian Lillard does. All these active players and these new school ideas that these guys belong on the top 75, I get it. I get that Damian Lillard is one of the most entertaining players to walk the earth nowadays. But still, Pau Gasol, 21st all-time in blocks, 28th all-time in rebounds, 39th in scoring, and 124th in assists. But still, this was a guy that could get it done on both sides of the floor. And he was also very, very influential at the time for international play. The things that he did in international play for the country of Spain is miraculous. It revitalized what we thought of the big man position, because this wasn't a guy that was built like I said, like a Dwight Howard. He didn't have like all these muscles on him. He was just a lean guy that could get the job done. And when you're talking about that Lakers run for the NBA title in the early 2010s and the 2009 season to 2010, or even in 2012, you're talking about a guy that he didn't need any other superstar besides Kobe Bryant. There was no big three. Ron Artest wasn't part of a big three. Andrew Bynum was a part of a big three. This was, the classic pick and roll with Kobe and Pau. That's how you won the title back then, was just hard play and the right principles. And Pau Gasol is one of my favorite players of all time, so I am biased. I'm not afraid to admit it. But these are 2 guys. I think the big man position is so undervalued when it comes to making up this position. I don't see what Anthony Davis did throughout any point in his career that Pau Gasol or Dwight Howard didn't end up doing.
I 100% agree. I would say a little bit on the Damian Lillard slander. I'm not ready to
Oh
put
my
Pau Gasol as a
goodness.
better
The
player.
man doesn't even have a
than
single
Damian Lillard.
NBA Finals appearance.
This man has never had an All-Star ever until there was LaMarcus Aldridge, and then it's been a cliff ever since he's been on that team.
Yeah.
Look at all these other players. Every single player that has been named on these top 75 players list has had a guy on their team who is decent enough to bring them to that level of playoff competition.
No,
At the point guard position is super hard, and I think that Damian Lillard, staying with the same team too, you got to give him credit. But I do think there's one player that you're not kind of given enough credit for being on the fringe of this list. And I actually had to look up. I hate to say my NBA knowledge is not as strong as I wanted it to be. Billy Cunningham. Does anybody here know who Billy Cunningham is?
That's an old school player.
Heard of him?
Yes, he played with the 76ers for about 9 seasons, and then he played in the ABA for 2 years with the Carolina Cougars.
Right?
Yeah, the 70s. He played in the 60s and 70s. He's a 4-time All-Star, 4-time All-NBA, and a 1967 NBA champion. Is he better than Dwight Howard? Is he better than Pau Gasol? I'm not saying that I watched this guy play, but just from looking at the accomplishments, what they did, impact on the NBA itself, I would go more towards. I mean, look at how Dwight Howard was able to revolutionize how that center position was played from an offensive standpoint in that in the late 2000s with the Magic. That get in the post, get the ball, pop it out. They hadn't seen that since Hakeem Olajuwon, Tim Duncan. Those were the kind of guys who did that. So when he brought it to the modern NBA with the idea of three-point shooting as a more impactful way with Stan Van Gundy over in Orlando, Dwight Howard was arguably one of the top 3 players in the NBA in his prime. And I think you're right on the nose with that. He doesn't get the credit. And same with Pau. Those are guys who, yeah, Kobe is the star player on that team, but if they don't have Pau Gasol and beating the Celtics in that game 7, it doesn't happen. Kobe went 9 for 24 or something bad like that, and it was Pau who was able to bring him to the promised land. So I 100% agree with you on those 2 picks.
Yeah. What's your concluding thoughts over there?
Look. Pau Gasol, 1,000%. Okay, there's no argument there. Everything you said about Pau Gasol was on the mark. And I'm not even going to argue that Dwight Howard shouldn't be on the top 75. I even agree with you there. But you gave me such a reaction for Klay Thompson, and you go ahead and give this big introduction. And you give this big introduction for Dwight Howard. I thought you were going to say somebody I'm like, wait, Michael Jordan's already on the list. That was such a great introduction. And
Klay Thompson.
And you say Dwight Howard. You understand? I mean, Dwight Howard deserves to be on the list. Yes, he I could probably name a couple of the OGs, like you mentioned, Billy Cunningham. Guys like that. He deserves to be on the list somewhere. Mm-hmm. However, you made a good argument for Vince Carter. That's what I heard. We're talking about a guy that had 2 careers, basically. One as a really dominant center, and because of that, and only because of that, he deserves to be on this list. And he's turned into a really good role player, but let's be honest. I mean, he's just, is Dwight Howard on your fantasy team, or is he picked up, or is he on the waiver wire?
He's not even on the Lakers right now. They're not even playing him.
It's been like this for a while, so he deserves to be on that list. It's just the reaction you gave me for Klay Thompson, and then you turn around and say Dwight Howard, and with such introduction, you gave it like a WWE entrance, like The Rock was coming out or something. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, they're playing the John Cena music. Dwight Howard walking out to the court. Dwight Howard would honestly, a little crossover there. If Dwight Howard wanted to quit in the NBA and go join the WWE, I wouldn't be opposed to that. That would be pretty interesting.
That little stuff where he got into Anthony Davis, that's not doing him any favors, but
no.
But
it looked like he was getting tickled, man. So.
Listen, this has been a great show. I'm glad we got some, deep takes in there per usual. It's in the name. A little bit more controversial takes as well, which we'll have to address in future weeks. But that's all for this week. Be sure that you guys are checking in every single Monday, 4 o'clock, we're here. We're ready to go. If you guys want to check out our content, it's at theathleteshub.org. We're also on Twitter. You guys can check us out. It's right on the ticker. We also have our new YouTube channel, which we are working daily on to update with clips like you're going to see from these episodes. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of them after today, but we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in.